It started as a joke, at least that's what I was told later, when everything had already burned to the ground and my life no longer resembled anything I'd recognize, a social experiment. She said just a harmless test, like pressing the fire alarm to see who runs, like faking a feint to watch who rushes over. Only this time the cost wasn't some wasted seconds or a few startled faces. It was my entire identity, my friendships, my dignity, and the terrifying realization that in the eyes of many, I was more interesting dead than alive. My name is Ava, and if you had told me a year ago that my best friend of 12 years would be the one to orchestrate the cruelest hoax of my life, I would have laughed because Haley was the girl who braided my hair before every school photo, the one who brought me soup when I was sick, who called me her soulmate. Not in the romantic way, but in that fierce, platonic way where you swear you'll be old ladies together yelling at neighborhood kids from your matching porches. So, how does that person become the villain? How does someone who's held your hand at your father's funeral turn around and casually draft your own obituary? It began quietly, and like most betrayals, with a seed planted in the shadows. Haley had been distant for weeks, glued to her phone more than usual, brushing off plans with vague excuses and weirdly specific ones like, I need to watch my cousin's turtle. And I figured, okay, maybe something's going on at home, or maybe she's just in a funk. We all get them. But then I stopped getting replies entirely. And I'd see her Instagram stories, selfies with mutual friends, going to events I wasn't invited to, captions like ride or dies that didn't include me. And a gnawing feeling started crawling under my skin that maybe I had done something wrong and just didn't know it. Maybe I had offended her unknowingly. So I sent one last text that said, Hey, are we good? And never got a response, not that day, not that week, not ever, because a few days later I found out from another friend, breathless and shaken, that Haley had told everyone I died in a car crash. Didn't make sense at first. I remember blinking stupidly at my screen like the words weren't computing, like maybe she meant something else, or maybe it was a weird metaphor. But no, she had told people sincerely and tearfully that I had died on the freeway late at night, claimed she got the call from my mom, who is very much alive and very confused, said she couldn't bear to share the news right away and needed time to grieve. And people believed her because why wouldn't they? She had photos of us, memories, old screenshots of our conversations, and she wielded them like proof, like grief tokens. And I only found out when someone tagged me in a TikTok tribute video made by a girl I barely knew, with a slideshow of pictures from middle school and a slow piano version of some Billie Eilish song. And I just stared at it thinking, am I dreaming? Is this a joke? But the caption said, RIP Ava gone too soon. And the comments were full of people I hadn't talked to in years, pouring out their sadness, saying they wish they had said more, done more, been better. Friends, and somewhere in that pile of digital mourning, I realized I was being mourned while still alive, still breathing, still sitting in my room with a half eaten bowl of cereal and a phone that had gone eerily silent. I tried calling Haley, of course I did, but she didn't answer. And then I was blocked everywhere: Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, even LinkedIn. Like she was trying to erase my existence, not just from her life, but from the internet itself. And the horrifying part, it kind of worked. People stopped reaching out, old friends stopped texting, and I couldn't even blame them because what are you supposed to do when someone tells you their best friend died and you don't see any contradiction when the digital world backs it up with tribute posts and hashtags? I felt like a ghost, like I had been buried under a lie so convincing that even I started questioning if I was still real. And then came the worst part: the messages, the ones I shouldn't have seen but did. Screenshots sent to me by the one person who hadn't bought the lie, my cousin Jenna, who got curious and dug deeper and discovered a private group chat Haley had made with a bunch of her mutuals titled Social Experiment, Project Ava, where she literally documented the process of pretending I was dead, tracking who cried, who posted, who messaged her privately to share memories or regrets. It was a game, a sick one, where my death was just a data point, a way for her to measure social metrics and get dopamine hits off people's reactions. And in one particularly revolting post she wrote, kind of wild how many people actually cared. Didn't think she mattered this much, to be honest. And I think something inside me shattered when I read that, like glass splintering in slow motion, because up until that moment, I'd still believed there was some kind of explanation, maybe even a delusional one like grief induced psychosis or a mental break. But no, this was planned, premeditated, mapped out like a science fair project. And the subject was my worth as a person measured by how many tears my fake death could generate. And I wish I could say it ended there, that people realized the truth and rallied around me. But that's not how the internet works, and certainly not how social groups do. Once a narrative takes hold, especially one soaked in. As a joke, at least that's what I was told later, when everything had already burned to the ground and my life no longer resembled anything I'd recognize. A social experiment, she said, just a harmless test, like pressing the fire alarm to see who runs, like faking a feint to watch who rushes over. Only this time the cost wasn't some wasted seconds or a few startled faces. It was my entire identity, my friendships, my dignity, and the terrifying realization that in the eyes of many, I was more interesting dead than alive. My name is Ava, and if you had told me a year ago that my best friend of 12 years would be the one to orchestrate the cruelest hoax of my life, I would have laughed because Haley was the girl who braided my hair before every school photo, the one who brought me soup when I was sick, who called me her soulmate. Not in the romantic way, but in that fierce, platonic way where you swear you'll be old ladies together yelling at neighborhood kids from your matching porches. So, how does that person become the villain? How does someone who's held your hand at your father's funeral turn around and casually draft your own obituary? It began quietly, and like most betrayals, with a seed planted in the shadows. Haley had been distant for weeks, glued to her phone more than usual, brushing off plans with vague excuses and weirdly specific ones like, I need to watch my cousin's turtle. And I figured, okay, maybe something's going on at home, or maybe she's just in a funk. We all get them. But then I stopped getting replies entirely. And I'd see her Instagram stories, selfies with mutual friends, going to events I wasn't invited to, captions like ride or dies that didn't include me. And a gnawing feeling started crawling under my skin that maybe I had done something wrong and just didn't know it. Maybe I had offended her unknowingly. So I sent one last text that said, Hey, are we good? And never got a response, not that day, not that week, not ever, because a few days later I found out from another friend, breathless and shaken, that Haley had told everyone I died in a car crash. Didn't make sense at first. I remember blinking stupidly at my screen like the words weren't computing, like maybe she meant something else, or maybe it was a weird metaphor. But no, she had told people, sincerely and tearfully, that I had died on the freeway late at night. Claimed she got the call from my mom, who is very much alive and very confused. Said she couldn't bear to share the news right away and needed time to grieve. And people believed her, because why wouldn't they? She had photos of us, memories, old screenshots of our conversations, and she wielded them like proof, like grief tokens. And I only found out when someone tagged me in a TikTok tribute video made by a girl I barely knew, with a slideshow of pictures from middle school and a slow piano version of some Billie Eilish song. And I just stared at it thinking, am I dreaming? Is this a joke? But the caption said, RIP Ava gone too soon. And the comments were full of people I hadn't talked to in years, pouring out their sadness, saying they wish they had said more, done more, been better. Friends, and somewhere in that pile of digital mourning, I realized I was being mourned while still alive, still breathing, still sitting in my room with a half eaten bowl of cereal and a phone that had gone eerily silent. I tried calling Haley, of course I did, but she didn't answer. And then I was blocked everywhere: Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, even LinkedIn. Like she was trying to erase my existence, not just from her life, but from the internet itself. And the horrifying part, it kind of worked. People stopped reaching out, old friends stopped texting, and I couldn't even blame them because what are you supposed to do when someone tells you their best friend died and you don't see any contradiction when the digital world backs it up with tribute posts and hashtags? I felt like a ghost, like I had been buried under a lie so convincing that even I started questioning if I was still real. And then came the worst part: the messages, the ones I shouldn't have seen but did. Screenshots sent to me by the one person who hadn't bought the lie, my cousin Jenna, who got curious and Dug deeper and discovered a private group chat Haley had made with a bunch of her mutuals titled Social Experiment. Project Ava, where she literally documented the process of pretending I was dead, tracking who cried, who posted, who messaged her privately to share memories or regrets. It was a game, a sick one where my death was just a data point, a way for her to measure social metrics and get dopamine hits off people's reactions. And in one particularly revolting post, she wrote, kind of wild how many people actually cared. Didn't think she mattered this much, to be honest. And I think something inside me shattered when I read that, like glass splintering in slow motion, because up until that moment, I'd still believed there was some kind of explanation, maybe even a delusional one like grief induced psychosis or a mental break. But no, this was planned, premeditated, mapped out like a science fair project. And the subject was my worth as a person measured by how many tears my fake death could generate. And I wish I could say it ended there, that people realized the truth and rallied around me. But that's not how the internet works, and certainly not how social groups do. Once a narrative takes hold, especially one soaked in emotion and grief, it doesn't like to be challenged. And when I try to tell people the truth, some of them accuse me of lying. Yes, me, the living, breathing person, accused of faking my own resurrection for attention, like I was the villain trying to invalidate their grief, like my mere existence was an inconvenience to the story they had already decided to believe. And Haley? She doubled down, said I was mentally unwell, that I had begged her to pretend I was dead for sympathy, and then turned it into a pity play where she claimed she was the real victim for being manipulated by me. It was such an audacious reversal that even I couldn't keep up, and suddenly I found myself not only socially exiled but smeared as some unstable attention seeker. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a betrayal, it was a character assassination, and it was working. You'd think there'd be a way to undo something like this, to just post a selfie holding a newspaper or go live and wave and say, hey, still alive, and the world would click undo like nothing happened. But no, the damage doesn't reverse just because truth walks in the room, especially when people are addicted to grief, when they've already lit the candles and posted the crying face emojis and turned your fake death into a form of social currency. No one wants to be told that the funeral they attended emotionally was for nothing, that the sadness they performed online was based on a lie, and especially not that they had been manipulated by the one person they thought was mourning most of all. And so I was met with resistance, disbelief, and worst of all, silence. The kind of silence that echoes in the bones, where people don't just ignore you, they erase you again, as if acknowledging you would require confronting their own gullibility, their own need to be seen caring. And so it was easier to pretend I didn't exist at all than to admit they'd gotten played. And I kept thinking, how did this happen? How did I go from someone with a best friend, a circle, a network, to being the girl everyone thinks faked her own death or died and came back just to be inconvenient? And worse, why did she do it? I obsessed over that question for weeks, digging through her old messages, scanning her posts, trying to pinpoint the moment she decided to turn my life into an experiment. And the answer wasn't clear, not in the usual ways. There wasn't a fight, no obvious rift, no jealousy I could recall, but the more I thought about it, the more I saw the quiet things, the micro moments, the times I got compliments and she didn't. When I was praised in school and she rolled her eyes, the time I got A scholarship and she said, must be nice, with a forced laugh, and maybe that resentment had been building for years, tucked beneath friendship like rot beneath paint, and I never noticed because I believed in her more than I watched her. And when the story finally broke, when my cousin made a video exposing what Haley had done, showing the chat screenshots and the timeline, and calling her out for the sociopath she was, I thought that would be it, the justice moment, the truth finally cutting through the noise. And it did go viral for a while. People were shocked and outraged, and the comment sections lit up with disbelief, calling her heartless, fake, evil, manipulative. But the internet moves fast, and outrage burns quickly. And within a few days, the heat died down, the views plateaued, and Haley, Haley pivoted. She deleted her socials for a few days, then came back with a teary-eyed apology video, claiming she had been battling undiagnosed BPD, that her therapist said she had abandonment issues, that she never meant to hurt anyone, and she was so sorry so deeply sorry, and God, people ate it up like candy. Because that's the thing. The internet forgives performance, not accountability. They don't want facts, they want feelings. And she gave them content, tears, the right camera angle, soft lighting, a trembling voice, and a caption that said, I was the villain in someone else's story, and I'm learning from it. And suddenly, she was brave, vulnerable, misunderstood, healing. And I was just noise in the background, the inconvenient undead girl with the audacity to stay alive. And while she got DMs of support and new followers, I got told to move on, that it wasn't that deep, that at least people cared, as if the pain I felt could be consoled by the temporary mourning of strangers, as if being the object of sympathy for A. Week was a fair trade for the psychological nuclear bomb she dropped on my life. I started having panic attacks in public, flinching when I saw people from school, not knowing whether they thought I was a liar or a ghost, or just too dramatic. I deleted all my socials for a while because every time I posted something, even something mundane, someone would comment, thought you were dead lol, or drop a skull emoji like it was funny. Like I was in on the joke of my own erasure. And then came the DMs from people I hadn't spoken to in years, saying things like, hey, this is so random, but your whole situation made me realize I never told you how cool I thought you were in high school. Or, I felt so bad when I heard what happened, and it made me reflect. And I wanted to scream because I wasn't a mirror for their self reflection. I wasn't a lesson or a cautionary tale. I was just a person, a real person, and no one treated me like one. And the worst moment came when my own mom got a call from someone at university I had applied to, offering their condolences because the news had somehow spread that far, and they had archived my file assuming I wouldn't be attending. And my mother, in her bathrobe with curlers in her hair, had to say the words, no, my daughter is not dead. She's right here. And I watched her face twist in confusion and then rage and then exhaustion. And I knew she wanted to protect me. But she was tired, tired of explaining something so absurd it sounded made up. And that's the part that stays with you. The absurdity, the sheer madness of having to prove you're alive, like it's not enough to exist. You have to defend your existence because someone decided it was more interesting to imagine you gone. And even now, months later, when things have settled, when Haley's got her little redemption arc and people have gone back to posting their coffees and sunsets and gym selfies, I live with the aftershock, the invisible bruise of being discarded and then mourned and then resented for not staying buried. And I keep asking myself, if this was a test to see who cared, what did it actually prove? That people care more about grief than presence? That someone's value spikes the moment they're no longer around to ask for it? That fake tragedy is more engaging than real connection? Because the truth is, when I was alive and visible, I was taken for granted. And when I was dead, I became mythologized. And now that I'm back, or never left, I'm an inconvenience, a reminder, a glitch in the narrative. And that's the thing they don't tell you. Sometimes coming back to life isn't a blessing, it's a burden. It's funny how silence becomes a language after something like this, how you start interpreting the absence of words as loud declarations. The friend who used to like every post but suddenly goes still, the relative who now avoids eye contact at gatherings, the classmate who once called you a light, now walking past you in the grocery store like you're a ghost with no name. And part of me kept trying to rationalize it, to give them all some kind of generous out, like maybe they're uncomfortable, or maybe they just don't know what to say. But when did being uncomfortable ever justify treating someone like they don't exist? When did awkwardness become a reason to let someone drown? And I think that's what hurt the most. Not Haley's betrayal, not the elaborate hoax, not even the lies she spun afterward, but the people who knew me, people who laughed with me, ate with me, studied with me, who saw the posts and the fallout and the receipts and still chose to stay quiet, to keep following her, to keep commenting, you look so cute, under her. Selfies like she hadn't just orchestrated a psychological drive-by. And the worst part? She gained followers, actual followers, like the whole drama gave her this tragic antihero aura, and people. People loved it because there's something intoxicating about watching someone self-destruct beautifully, especially when they're good at packaging it in apologies and introspection and hashtags about healing. And she knew it She leaned into it, started doing posts about mental health journeys and forgiveness and learning from our darkest moments. And all I could think was, your darkest moment was my funeral, and you threw it while I was still breathing. And meanwhile, I couldn't even go to school without someone whispering, someone pointing, someone making some sick joke about zombies or ghosts or resurrected Ava, like I was a walking meme instead of a girl whose entire social foundation had been detonated for likes and analytics. And I started withdrawing, disappearing for real this time. Not because I wanted to, but because it was the only way to stop hurting, to stop stepping into rooms where I was both too real and not real enough, where people looked at me like a question they didn't want the answer to. And I began to notice how much of my identity had been tied to others, how being Ava and Haley for so long had erased the parts of me that didn't fit the brand, how even my hobbies had bent toward hers, my language, my style. And when she cut me off and replaced me with absence, I didn't just lose her, I lost the version of myself that had grown in her shadow. And the grief hit in waves, not just for what she did, but for what it revealed. That so many people only valued me through her lens, and once that lens distorted, so did their perception of me. And it made me wonder how real anything had ever been. How many of my friendships were just proximity friendships, social inertia, people staying close to me because I was adjacent to her. The cooler one, the louder one, the more curated one. And when she turned off the light, I saw how few people stayed in the room. And it broke me for a while in a way I didn't have the words for, in a way that wasn't cinematic or beautiful or even rage filled, just hollow, like a bruise that never surfaces but still aches when you press it. And I stopped doing the things I loved, stopped painting, stopped journaling, even stopped going to therapy. Because what was the point of healing when you didn't even know who you were anymore? And then one day, I got a message, not a long one, just, I know what she did. I believe you. It was from someone I barely remembered, a girl I partnered with in sophomore chem, quiet, kind, always on the edge of the group, and it hit me like a gut punch because I realized how desperate I'd become for any form of validation, how much weight those 6 words carried. And that was the first thread back, the first glimmer of something real. And slowly, slowly, others trickled in, not many, but enough to remind me that I wasn't entirely alone, that not everyone had bought the story or chosen comfort over truth. And we started talking, a handful of us, all people who had, in some way, been collateral damage in Haley's orbit, people who had been ghosted, discarded, gaslit. And I learned things I wish I hadn't, like how she used to manipulate people into fighting each other just to see who was more loyal, how she kept files, actual files, on people's insecurities, fears, things they'd confessed in confidence, and used them as leverage when she wanted control. And I realized then, this wasn't just about me. This wasn't some one-off prank. It was a pattern, a history, a sickness. And while everyone else was too enamored with her apology arc to look deeper, there was a whole constellation of hurt behind her growth. And I was just the most visible casualty. And part of me wanted revenge, not in a dramatic, blow up her life kind of way, but in a colder sense. In the way you want someone to finally face the weight of their own actions, to have to live with the damage instead of skate past it wrapped in ring lights and hashtags. But the truth is, no amount of exposure or virality could undo what was done, could restore what was lost. And what I needed wasn't her downfall, it was myself, whatever was left of me after the fire. And so I started rebuilding, not loudly, not for anyone else, but in quiet ways. I joined an art group under a different name, started a new account that had nothing to do with my past, didn't follow anyone I used to know, just started from scratch, piece by piece. And it didn't fix everything, but it helped me remember what it felt like to be seen without history, without context, just as a person, flawed and learning. And there was something liberating in that, something sacred about being able to choose who sees you, who really sees you. And that became my quiet rebellion. Not revenge, but resurrection. Not the kind that comes with attention, but the kind that comes with intention. A rebirth on my terms. You'd think coming back to life would be dramatic, cinematic, the kind of thing that restores everything you lost, but it wasn't like that. It was slow, raw, mostly invisible to anyone except me, like learning to walk again with legs that still remembered what it felt like to fall. And sometimes I'd catch myself checking her account. Not because I missed her, but because I wanted to see if she even remembered, if she posted anything that hinted at regret or realization, or if I'd just become. Another chapter she closed and deleted like an old Instagram highlight. And of course, she didn't. She posted about her new dog, her healing journey, her podcast. Yeah, she started a podcast called Unfiltered, where she talked about growth and boundaries and toxic people. And I swear to you, in one episode, she said, sometimes the people closest to us are the most dangerous. And the irony nearly made me laugh out loud in the middle of the bus, like, girl, you're the danger. You're the radioactive fallout wrapped in aesthetic affirmations and candle sponsorships. And the way people still applauded her, still sent her messages like, you inspire me, made me feel like I was the one losing my grip on reality, like I'd stumbled into some alternate timeline where being eloquent and broken on camera was more important than being decent in real life. And I know it's not healthy to obsess. I know it gives her more space in my mind than she deserves. But the truth is, when someone rewrites your story and the world reads their version, it's hard not to want to scream your own pages back into existence. And every time I try to talk about it, really talk about it, people would get uncomfortable. They'd say, you should let it go, or don't give her power, or the worst one, maybe she didn't mean it that way. Like intentions were some kind of magic eraser for pain. And I hated how easily the narrative shifted, how her tears were believed and my anger was seen as bitterness. How she got to be human and I got reduced to a plot twist. And that's the thing they don't tell you about being wronged. People only like survivors. When they smile through it, when they're grateful for the pain, when they tie it in a bow and call it a lesson. But if you're still angry, still raw, still bleeding, they call you stuck, dramatic, toxic, like healing is only valid when it's palatable. And I really did, to make it palatable, to journal and meditate and drink water and say all the right things about growth and forgiveness. But deep down, I didn't want to forgive her. I wanted her to feel it, to carry the weight of what she did every day, like I carry the aftermath. But even that felt like a lost cause because Haley was the kind of person who could rationalize anything, twist it into a lesson for her followers, say, I've made peace with my past like her past wasn't a trail of scorched earth and collateral damage. And eventually I stopped waiting for closure because closure implies something closes, but some wounds don't. Some just stay open, scar over, reopen again when someone mentions her name or when Facebook memories throw her face in your timeline like a ghost you didn't summon. And speaking of ghosts, that's how I started to feel, not in a dramatic way, not in a no one sees me kind of way, but in the subtle, aching way of existing slightly out of phase with the people around you, like everyone else is at a party you weren't invited to, even though it used to be your house. And it got worse before it got better. I won't lie. There were nights where I just lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was it, if I'd be haunted by this forever, if there'd ever be a day where her name didn't sting, where I didn't feel like a ghost in my own life. But then something small would happen. I'd meet someone who didn't know the story and like me anyway, or I'd paint something and not hate it, or I'd laugh so hard I forgot for a minute that I'd been broken. And those tiny moments stitch me back together in a way no public reckoning ever could. Because healing isn't a spectacle, it's a series of tiny rebellions against despair, 1,000 choices to stay when it'd be easier to disappear. And eventually, I stopped looking for her updates, stopped checking who she was collabing with or how many comments she got, not because I didn't care anymore, but because I started caring more about myself. And that shift was subtle but seismic, like reclaiming your breath after someone's been sitting on your chest. And I found new people, real ones, people who didn't care about followers or aesthetics, people who saw me not as a lesson, but as a whole person with jagged edges and messy timelines. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen without being surveilled. And that's something Haley never gave me. Not really, because even in our best friendship, there's always a camera lens between us, always a performance, a subtle competition. But now, I had conversations that weren't curated, laughter that wasn't recorded, relationships that weren't filtered. And that was the real resurrection. Not coming back from the fake death she staged, but finally waking up from the version of myself I'd performed to stay loved. And as for her, I don't know what she's doing now. And honestly, I don't need to, because whatever followers she gained, whatever content she's making, I know the truth. Not the internet's truth, not the story she spun. My truth, the one she tried to bury but couldn't kill. And that truth is louder than likes, deeper than drama, and more alive than she'll ever be. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes after you've been erased. Once you've had your name dragged through digital mud. Once people have eulogized you with filters and hashtags. Once your absence has become more interesting than your presence. You start seeing the world differently. Like you develop this sixth sense for fake empathy, for performative concern, for the way people use other people's pain as a stage to show off their compassion. And I saw it everywhere after what happened. The subtle signals, the way someone would say I was devastated when I heard, but never once checked in with me when they found out it was a lie, or how someone reposted my memorial graphic and added crying emojis, but didn't even remember my last name in person. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, the way grief gets turned into content, how mourning becomes a kind of social currency. And I realized that Haley didn't invent that. She just knew how to use it better than anyone. She knew exactly what to say, how to package heartbreak into views, how to manipulate the platform's hunger for pain. Because the internet doesn't want healing, it wants drama, it wants wounds wide open, stories that bleed, people who fall apart beautifully. And she gave them that. She made my death a narrative arc, my resurrection an inconvenience, my survival a plot hole. And I don't think she ever truly understood the depth of what she did because to her it was never about me. I was a variable in her experiment, a tool in her social equation. And when I refused to play along, when I kept breathing and showing up and refusing to stay buried, she didn't apologize, she pivoted. And I watched as she rebranded herself, not just as a person who made a mistake, but as a kind of social martyr, someone who took accountability and learned through pain, and people loved her for it, even though the only pain she ever acknowledged was her own. And I had to sit with that, with the reality that sometimes the villain gets the applause, sometimes the liar writes the history, and sometimes the one who suffered most gets forgotten first. And it almost broke me. Honestly, the injustice of it, the raw imbalance, how she got brand deals and speaking invites while I was still explaining to college admissions officers why someone reported my death, how she got sympathy and I got suspicion, how people whispered that I must have done something to deserve it. Because that's another ugly truth no one likes to say out loud. When something horrible happens to you, people want there to be a reason, not for justice, but for comfort, because if they can believe you somehow caused it, they can believe it won't happen to them. And so they start rewriting you in their heads, turning you from victim to villain to restore order to their world. And I became that for a lot of people, the messy one, the dramatic one, the unstable one, all because I refused to disappear quietly. And there were days I almost gave in, almost let them win, almost shut it all down and vanish for real. But something in me kept fighting, not out of pride, not even out of anger, but out of this quiet, defiant belief that I was more than what she tried to turn me into. And that belief became my anchor. Because if I couldn't change their minds, I could still protect my own. I could build something outside their reach. And so I started writing, not for an audience, not for revenge, just for me. I wrote down everything, the memories, the rage, the betrayals, the tiny moments of kindness that got me through the ugly truths that no one wants to admit. And slowly, those pages became something else. Not just therapy, not just survival, but a kind of map, a way back to myself. Because here's the thing, when someone tells the world you're dead, they're not just stealing your breath, they're stealing your narrative. And the only way to take it back is to write it yourself. And so I did, quietly, obsessively, day after day, until the weight started lifting, until the anger turned into clarity, until the grief turned into something sharper. And then I shared it, not all at once, not with the people who hurt me, but in a space that was mine, under a pseudonym, a new page, a new name. And people found it, strangers mostly, but they understood it, they resonated, they cried. They commented paragraphs about their own betrayals, their own erasures. And for the first time in so long, I felt understood, not by the people I lost, but by the ones I hadn't met yet. And that's when it hit me. Healing isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about building something better with what's left. And I started building a new life, a new circle, one made not of shared aesthetics or mutual followers, but of honesty, vulnerability, trust, And it was slower, quieter, less shiny, but it was real. And real, I learned, is rare. And that made it sacred. And the more I stepped into that truth, the less power Haley had over me because she could rewrite the internet's version of me. But she couldn't touch this life I had now, this self I'd reclaimed. And yeah, I still have days where it stings when someone brings her up, or when someone who once cried at my fake memorial now acts like it never happened. But those days are fewer now. And when they come, I remind myself that survival itself is a kind of poetry, that living well is its own revenge. Not because it erases the pain, but because it honors the fact that I survived. It, you know what nobody tells you about coming back from a betrayal that public, that grotesque, that intimate? It never ends where people think it does. They expect closure, a final scene, a clean resolution like the last frame of the movie where the music swells and you walk off into a better life, stronger, shinier, healed. But it's not like that. Not even close. It lingers in strange places, in the pauses before you trust someone new, in the urge to over explain yourself even when no one's asking, in the hyper awareness that people's attention spans are shorter than your healing process. And maybe that's the real cost of what Haley did. Not just the lies or the betrayal or the fact that she played God with my existence, but the part of me she rewired, the quiet damage she left behind, like how I flinch when someone says best friend, or how I second guess every apology, every compliment, every new beginning, because now I know that. Someone can know every inch of your soul and still weaponize it for content. That someone can share your secrets and still bury you with silence. That someone can watch you unravel and call it a case study. And that kind of betrayal doesn't just take your breath, it takes your anchor. And without that anchor, you drift for months, maybe years. And every moment of peace feels temporary, like a trick, like a lull before the next storm. But eventually, if you keep breathing, if you keep walking forward, even when your legs don't want to move, you find something else, not closure, but meaning, not justice, but perspective. And that's what I have now. Not a happy ending, not a comeback story with violins and redemption arcs, but a quiet kind of peace that I built from the wreckage. And in that peace, I found a version of myself I actually like, not the curated one, not the one Haley approved, not the one who posted carefully timed selfies for likes, but the one who survived, the one who knows what it's like to be forgotten and still keep showing up, the one who stopped performing and started living, and I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anyone. Not the grief, not the confusion, not the days where I actually questioned if I had died in some way. But I also wouldn't erase it, because without it, I'd still be sleepwalking through a life shaped by someone else, still thinking loyalty meant silence, still believing that friendship required self erasure. And now I know better. I know that anyone who needs to kill you metaphorically to get attention is not someone who ever loved you. I know that real friends don't need you dead to validate their existence. I know that healing doesn't always look like forgiveness, and that's okay. And maybe the biggest thing I've learned is this: if someone can convince the world you're gone, and you still find the strength to show up, to speak, to exist anyway, that's power, that's truth, that's survival in its rawest, most terrifying, most beautiful form. It makes you unstoppable in a way. Not because you're fearless, but because you've already lost everything people fear losing: reputation, trust, connection. And still, you're here, not as a ghost, not as a story, but as a person, flawed, alive, honest. And that kind of resilience can't be faked, can't be packaged, can't be monetized. It just is. And I carry that with me now. Every time I get anxious in a group setting, every time I hesitate before hitting post, every time I feel the ache of remembering how it all used to be, I carry the fact that I made it, not in spite of her lie, but because of what it showed me. And maybe that's what scares people the most. Not the idea that someone like Haley exists, but that someone like me can survive her, that someone can lose everything and still build something worth living for. And yeah, I still wonder sometimes what people think when they hear the real story, when they find out I was never dead, only discarded, when they realize the girl they cried over in the comments is the same one they scroll past now. Do they feel guilt? Shame? Confusion? Or do they just move on like they always do, like the internet taught them to? I'll probably never know. And I've made peace with that because my healing doesn't depend on their realization. It lives in the quiet things now, in the pages I write under my own name again, in the friends who ask how I really am, in the spaces where I can speak and be believed. And that's more than enough. Not because it fixes what happened, but because it proves that even when someone takes everything from you, they can't take you. And if there's anyone listening to this, watching this, reading this, who's been there, who's been erased, silenced, gaslit, manipulated, discarded, I want you to know something. You are not your betrayal. You're not the version of you that someone else tried to sell. You're not the silence they left you in. You are what survived. And that makes you terrifying, beautiful, free. And no one gets to rewrite that story but you.